Good morning. It's so nice to see so many of you joining us for the first PBIS Leaders Network of the year. I know this is one of our favorite opportunities to connect with all of you, to be able to share some information, but also just give you the chance to share what you're working on in your districts, what's working, what you have questions about, and just trying to support each other as you walk through this time frame. So we're going to go ahead and get started like Heidi said. So Heidi, if you want to advance. We do have a bit.ly for the presentation today. So
Stace, you somehow got muted again.
Okay, sorry about that. So if there is a bit.ly in the chat, so you're welcome to follow along and be able to access all the live links throughout today's presentation as we move forward. So as we were thinking about today and just the start of this year, we were curious from you, what would you say has been a wow so far this year? And what is something that's got you wondering? So if you could just drop some of those in the chat, we would just like to hear from you. It can be something as simple as, wow, it's October 6th already. And what are you wondering about? I know there's been so many changes and so many things that districts are being faced with. And so we would love to hear from what you have to share from where you're at today. And I see Stacy said, wow, we still have no subs and bus drivers. Wow, that is tough. And unfortunately, I think that's pretty common. And wondering, how are we going to get everything done? Thanks, Joy, for sharing that. I'm sure you're not alone in that thought. And again, how are we going to complete all of these tasks effectively with so few resources? And these are really, they're real wonderings and questions. Yeah. And then I love Sherry just shared, wondering how some students and staff are so resilient. And that is something that we have seen through PBIS and through the framework and through some of the practices of really supporting each other and really still acknowledging those behaviors we want to see is really beneficial. And wondering how we will help students get through this. And we're hoping that through opportunities like this, through this networking, that you will be able to reach out to others within other districts and programs to kind of support each other about what is working, what are some of the challenges, and what are some things that you can support each other with as we continue to move forward. Yeah. And Tawana, I see yours too, wondering how many people will start to leave the profession due to all the stress. And that's a real concern about what's happening. And then how to support people with that high level of stress as well.
I saw Nicole also say students are struggling with just in-person routines. Mm-hmm. That's a wow too. Like some of them have been out of school. Yeah.
Right. We've heard that same thing too. Just even the rigor of the academics, being back in person is a different challenge than being virtual. So thank you for sharing. We just wanted to give you that opportunity, and feel free to continue to, as you're thinking about those, drop them in there. Because once again, just a way for you to get some of your thoughts out, just to share those things that have been rolling around in your mind as you're thinking about this school year. So as we move forward today for our agenda, we're really going to take a time. We've got a few different areas we wanted to focus on. One, as many of you I'm sure are aware, there is a new law and role updates around PBIS. So we're going to take some time, and Heidi's going to go through those for us and just share that information. And then we also wanted to give you some input as to upcoming network topics. So as we plan to do this network throughout the year, we would love to have your input. We've already got some ideas from just meeting with some of you already, but we would like to gain your input on that as well. And then we're going to take a time and just share a few resources that are available to you. And we're going to end with a time where really and truly what we've designed is time for you to network, to unmute, get on camera and share what's going on, what's working, what you have questions about, and just really give you that opportunity to support each other through this process. So I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Heidi, and she's going to take us through the law and the role updates. And as we move forward, we do have an idea board to serve as a parking lot. So as Heidi's sharing things about the rule, if there's any questions you have, things that prompt your thinking, feel free to drop those in, and that'll give us a good way to follow up with some of those questions. Because we, as you are going through the rule, and as you ask questions, because you're the people who implement, you really do have great questions that help us go back and say, what more do we need to find out about this? So thanks. I'm going to turn it over to Heidi.
Thanks, Stacy. And I wish we could say we know all the answers. We don't. So if there is a question, please pop it on that idea boards. There's 2 sections there. One, like questions that you still have, and 2, what kind of support maybe that you may need from us. So that idea boards will kind of serve a dual purpose there. So we're going to jump right in, and I'm going to just say right off the bat that when we get to the part about the restraint and seclusion, the new updates there, I may be doing a little reading to you because I don't want to misspeak, especially when it comes to those really those legal considerations. So when I get to that point, I may be doing a little reading to you, and I'm just going to apologize ahead of time. So we're going to start by looking at what we've really had in the past. House Bill 318, which is our suspension, expulsion, and pre-K through 3 PD rule, or a law, I should say, is coming. I don't want to say it's coming to an end, but we are now at almost November. November in 2018 is when this particular Ohio Revised Code went into play, and we are kind of coming to the end of that. So at this point, really, you should have been working on getting that PD done in your building. What is going to kind of linger from that law is going to be, this is the year that you should have had 100% reduction in suspensions and expulsions, and that will continue in pre-K through 3. What we're really going to be focusing on for this morning's meeting is that second piece there, and that is what they're calling the rule, and that is K-12. And that's really about what kind of PD is required, who is required to do that PD, and it's going to be the restraint and seclusion updates as well as going to be in that rule. So we'll continue as we go through. And again, please use the idea boards if you have questions, and chat will be open as well if there's something that you want to pop in there. So what we're really talking about this morning is that the standards for kindergarten through 12th grade, and that is the implementation of positive behavior interventions and supports, and the use of restraint and seclusion. So we know right now that the schools and districts that are required to be implementing this rule are local exempted village, city, joint vocational, or cooperative education school districts, any ESC that operates a school or educational program. Community schools are required to implement this rule. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics schools, or STEM schools, and then any college preparatory boarding schools. So that's who is required to implement this rule. So we are going to go ahead and now go over the components of what that rule says. So this is a new definition in the rule, and it talks about your leadership team. And the leadership team is really that team that the district, at the district or building level, I should say the district and building level, that plans, coaches, and monitors the PBIS implementation in the district and the building. And the rule includes now language regarding school administrators being on that team, teacher representatives being on that team, and staff that will provide that behavioral expertise. Other representatives are noted in the rule, and that could be personnel such as bus drivers, your food service staff, custodial staff, and any of the paraprofessionals that do work with students. So this is a newly added definition that is in that rule. So this is talking about your team. The next slide talks about your, there's some animation there, sorry about that. The next slide really talks about personnel. So in the rule, there are several places where personnel is referred to. And personnel now is defined by what you see as those bullets on your screen. The teacher, the principal, the counselor, social worker, your SROs if you have them in the building, aides, psychologists, bus drivers, related service providers, nurses, and any other district staff that would interact with students. So as we go through, we kind of talked about who could be on your team, but when we start talking about who needs to have PD, because there's a distinction between training and professional development. Your team receives the training, but your student personnel receives the PD or the professional development. There's going to be several slides that are going to say personnel need to have. And when they're talking about personnel, they're talking about these identified roles. So in the, we've known since the policy went into effect in 2013, that this statement has always been true. And that is, each school district will implement positive behavior intervention and supports on a system-wide basis. We've known that. But what this rule has done is it has really extended what that looks like. It wasn't very specific in 2013 when the rule came out. So they have extended that. And let's take a look at what that looks like. So there are now some requirements that are written into the rule as far as PBIS implementation. One of them would be that data-based decision-making. What kind of systems are you using to collect that data, to look at behaviors and patterns in your building? How are your teams getting together to make those decisions? What are they, what kind of meeting schedule do you have, and how are you capturing that information on whatever platform that is? Anything that's being done in that PBIS team meeting, though, and done for the building or district, needs to be founded in data. So that is now a requirement. The use of evidence-based practices along a multi-tiered continuum, that is also identified in the new rule. How are we using those? What are we doing that is evidence-based? We're not using just any practice. We are using practices that we know are founded in research and in evidence and in empirical studies. Also, what are your systems? How are your systems set up so that you can implement and monitor what's happening in PBIS? What does that system look like at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3? And then how are those systems integrated? And then how are you progress monitoring what's happening? How do you know when it's time to make changes or tweak what you're doing or make course corrections as far as your system is concerned? So these are things that are a little bit called out. We're going to talk a little bit more about what the PD requirements are, and they are going to be tying right back to these 4 bullets that you see on your screen. But these are things now that this language was not in the original rule. So we want to make sure that we're making decisions based on data. We're using evidence-based practices. We're making sure that our systems are implemented with fidelity. And then we're progress monitoring to make sure that things are changing and evolving as our district, our school, our students, and our staff need. So the PD requirements, and now we're going to go into the restraint and seclusion requirements. I will pause and take a breath. And if there's anything that anybody needs to bring up, or if there's anything in the chat box, I will pause for that. And I believe we are not recording again, right?
I went ahead and started the recording.
Oh,
again.
you did? Oh, thank you so much, Stacy. So we'll have to figure out what that's going to look like when we're done.
We missed a little chunk there, but it's okay. Stacy did put a comment in the chat about non-certified staff does not go through the LPDC. So there's just a consideration there.
Oh my goodness, that's correct. So, so I guess my thought would be just making sure that's covered somehow or documented somehow. If they don't, that's correct. And that has come up before when we've talked to the state about this. So I would, that might be, that's something. And Stacy, if you don't mind, could you pop that into the idea boards? And that's something I will take back, because you're exactly right. Those folks do not go through the LPDC. And that's a question I will ask at the state level to my contacts. Anything else before we jump into, until we jump into the real fun part of the rule, as I say.
Yes, yes, I have a question. Is any of this information located in that public school works where they have a lot of online training for non-certified staff?
Now, I don't know about that, but I'll throw that to the group. Not to my knowledge, but does anybody know is it in public school works? If somebody would like to pop in the chat or unmute, I'm not familiar. It's a good question. Maybe that can also be popped into the idea boards, and I will ask around, and I'll ask my counterparts at the state as well. Okay, I'm going to jump into the next part, which is probably what many people this morning came for, and that is the components of this rule that are going to apply to the emergency use of restraint and seclusion. A lot of this is new language. So the first part of this part of the rule talks about what is your plan for crisis training, crisis management, de-escalation training. And so what you're seeing on your screen here is new language regarding that training. So previously, these were recommended by the department. Now they are required that the training for crisis management include what's on the next two slides. And that is those proactive measures to, so the PD that staff is receiving should include these topics: measures to prevent restraint and seclusion, crisis management, how you document and communicate when a restraint or a seclusion has taken place. So that should be included in the training. What is the documentation process for that or protocol? Safe use of restraint and seclusion, and then instruction on the accommodation and for age and size of students who are being restrained. So those are that's the first part about that. And then the second part about that is, in the training, there should also be components of how you monitor when students are in distress if you are performing a restraint. What are your debriefing practices after the restraint or the seclusion has occurred? What are those practices to talk about prevention the next time or plans that you might have? This is also new. The training has to be face-to-face. It is not to be a virtual training to my understanding. It has to be a face-to-face training. And in that training, there must be simulated experience. So that means folks who are engaged in the training must have practice at those holds. I know I've been CPI trained, and I know part of that training, I mean, I know every district uses a different place organization, but I know in that particular training, we did have simulated experience for doing a restraint to make sure we're doing it the right way. And then there's also in this particular rule is there has to be a demonstration of proficiency. In other words, how are people in that training showing that they know what the techniques are? So what protocols, techniques, and materials were really about what the proficiency is. So is there some sort of quiz? I know with CPI, there was a quiz I think I had to take at the end of that training. How are you demonstrating proficiency? In addition to that, the school district is responsible for maintaining either written or electronic records about the name, position, and building assignment of each person who completed that training. So I'll slow down because that's not on the slide. So the district is responsible for including in their training file, electronic or paper, the name, position, and the building assignment of each person who completed the training. I know some of you guys are writing down feverishly, so I'll slow down. In addition to that, the name, position, and credentials of the person who provided the training. So that is the name, position, and credentials of the person or persons that completed the training, when the date when the training was completed. And then I incidentally said this too early, what protocols, techniques, and materials were included in the training. So who was trained and what their role was, when the training was, who did the training, when the training was, and what protocols and training materials were used. So in addition to the last two slides that talked about the components of the professional development, you have to maintain those other records as well. Okay. Again, this is all new language in that rule. And if you hear the department, they are going to be using the term rule. When they talk about the rule, this is what they're talking about. For this part, I'm going to do a little bit of reading because I want to make sure I get it right. This is the professional development and review for student personnel. So the training for the crisis management or your de-escalation is, you guys know, is limited to usually a select members of your team. It's not everybody that receives this training. But in addition to the training requirements that we just talked about, the rule outlines that student personnel are to be trained to perform the following functions: identifying factors as where, under what conditions, and with whom, and why specific inappropriate behavior may occur. Use of preventative assessments that review existing data. Obtain input from the family members and student and examine previous behavior interventions. And more than likely, this information could be covered within the district's PBIS professional development as well. You could include that as per the department. Also, the school district will provide student personnel a review on the content of this rule and any local policies and procedures related to the use of PBIS and restraint and seclusion. So the district is responsible to make sure that personnel, again, we're going back to that second slide or third slide, are trained, and there is a review done annually on that policy.
And Heidi, there was
Also, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, and there was a question about how often does the training need to occur?
De-escalation training, I believe, occurs annually. At least a review has to occur, and I will throw that to anybody out there that might know that. But I believe de-escalation training occurs yearly with if you need new, or people can just do a refresh, like a review. If anybody knows differently than that, you can unmute or pop it in the chat. That was my understanding.
Sorry, I believe, just because I was attended when it comes to CPI, if you've had the initial full day training, I believe annually you need to have, it's a half day refresher course. If you've already got the first full day.
Yeah, that's my
CPI.
understanding. Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Yep, that's my understanding too. So that training occurs annually, and now a review of the policy is going to have to happen annually. In addition to that, the rule also says that districts are to ensure that there is a support plan in place for substitute teachers if they need assistance with PBIS and or crisis management and de-escalation. So that is now also new to the rule. Districts must plan how they will inform substitutes about policies and who they can contact if behaviors become unsafe. So there has to be a plan for those subs. Okay. And again, student personnel, when we're looking at these policy changes, it really is that teacher, principal, counselor, social worker, SRO, teacher's aide, psychologist, bus driver, really anybody that interacts with a student. We defined that earlier on. Okay. We're still wrapping our heads around it too. I'm sure the districts we're still kind of wrapping our heads around it. The other thing that you guys already do, and you're already familiar with, is you do an annual reporting to the department of how many restraints and seclusions that has happened in that previous year. Something that is new in the rule though is if you are a school that works with the ESC or the DD, you have to determine who is going to report that data. Either entity can report it, but you have to determine who's going to report it. So either the ESC can report it, or the ESC or the DD can report it on behalf of the school or the district, or the district can report it, but you just have to decide. You guys have been doing restraint and seclusion reporting for many years, so you know that piece of it, but this really impacts those other entities that are kind of working with the school districts, who's going to report that, because in the past, I think it has not been a clean process as to who is reporting that data. So if you are working through an ESC or a DD, you have to determine who's going to make that reporting. This is also new, and I know you guys have heard about this, and that is if there is something that happens as a third incident of a behavior, after that third incident of physical restraint or seclusion of the behavior, because of a behavior in a school year, the school team will meet within 10 school days after that third incident to discuss the need to conduct, review, or amend an FBA, or functional behavior assessment or behavior intervention plan. So after that third incident, you conduct a meeting to determine the need. Now, what I'm reading in this is it doesn't say you have to conduct the FBA, but that is my interpretation. What I'm reading is it is saying that you should conduct a team to determine if there is a need for that. And that is how I'm reading it. If the team has an IEP or a 504, that would include that team, the IEP or the 504 team, including the parent. If it is not a child on an IEP or a 504 plan and is in gen ed, that team should include the parent, administrator, or designee, teacher of that student having the issue, a staff member involved in the incident, and anybody else who would make sense to be on that team. So if the child does have an IEP or 504, you can utilize that team for that. If the child is a gen ed student, you have to convene a team. Okay. The state also wants us to make you aware that you do not have to wait till the third incident to do this. If there is incidents that have happened before the third, and you think that it is something that is necessary or something that you need to do, you can convene that team prior to the third incident. You don't have to wait, but you must after the third. This is also new, and this to me was kind of an aha and oh my goodness, when I read this. There is now a new complaint process within the policy, the rule, I should say the rule. And that is the district is responsible for providing annual notice to inform their families of this policy. And it is about the procedures for the implementation of positive behavior intervention and supports and the use of restraint and seclusion. So the district is required to provide that yearly notice. They must provide that notice to parents in the district. It doesn't say how, but it says they must provide the notice. Also, as a part of the policy, each district will have a written procedure for a parent to present when complaints to that will allow parents to present complaints to the superintendent of the school to initiate an investigation after a restraint or seclusion if they want to make a complaint. New to the rule is that this procedure must now provide parents with additional options for complaints to other public agencies, such as law enforcement, child protective services, the Office of Professional Conduct within the Ohio Department of Education. So not only is the district providing what that process is, but they must provide additional options to go further with the complaint beyond the school district. That's new language, and it's, when I heard it, it was like really like an explosion in my mind when I saw that, because this is kind of new. This is very different than the way we've been doing things in the past. The third thing there is within 30 days of the filing of the complaint, the district will make reasonable efforts to have an in-person follow-up meeting with the parent to discuss the findings of their investigation. So annual notice, written procedures to the parents, including other options that they have to go outside the district. And then within 30 days of that complaint, they must provide a meeting with the parent to let them know what the findings of the investigation were. And I apologize for reading to you guys, but I want to get it right. I don't want to give you the wrong information. The other thing to me that was another revolutionary thing about this whole rule update is that in the past, for you special ed directors out there, you know that complaint process was reserved for students with disabilities. That is not the case with this rule. Any parent of a child in a district or school can make a complaint. They don't have to be a student on an IEP. They don't have to be a student with disabilities. So anybody can make a complaint within this process. That is something that's really, really new. I'm going to read to you and you'll see it on the screen, what they can make a complaint about. And then I'm going to tell you what they can't make a complaint about. The first thing that they can make a complaint about would be that training and professional development about the use of crisis management and de-escalation. They can make a complaint about that. The example that the state gives me is, my child was restrained by someone who was never trained, or the parent doesn't feel the training offered by the school met the training requirements in the rule. So if they feel that the person who restrained the child was not trained, they can make a complaint about that. Or if the training wasn't sufficient, they can make a complaint. They can make a complaint about policies and procedures about the restraint and seclusion itself. They can make a complaint about monitoring and reporting seclusion. Here, the example they give is the teacher texted me and told me my child was placed in seclusion, but I never received a write-up about the incident. So they can make a complaint about that. And then they can also make a complaint about multiple incidents if things keep occurring that happen and there's no intervention done as a result. The complaint process does not include complaints about PBIS professional development requirements. So they can't complain about if they're not fulfilling the requirements of PBIS. They cannot make a complaint about allegations about injuries related to this restraint or seclusion. They cannot make a complaint about a prohibited restraint, such as chemical, mechanical, or prone restraint. They cannot make a complaint about that. If a prohibited seclusion was used with your child, such as a seclusion in a locked room, or the child was left unattended, you cannot make a complaint about that. Allegations of child abuse or neglect, allegations of retaliation, or allegations about racism or discrimination. And the reason for that is there are other departments at ODE that handle all of those things. So there are other processes the parents can go through to make a complaint, but it would not be through this rule and it would not be through this department. So it's not that you can't do those things, you just can't do it through this complaint process. There is a lot here. And with our little 1 hour meeting, I wanted to this is a lot of what was covered in the webinar that I shared out in our my network email, but we wanted to go through it with you again, because it's taken me, I've been going through this for as soon as the policy came out over and over again, and I'm still learning. So there's a lot to it. So here are the resources that the department will suggest to you. If you have the bit.ly, these are all live linked. You can get to the professional development guidance. There is a model policy on ODE for restraint and seclusion. If your district doesn't have one, I would say start there. There are you can see the requirements for the crisis prevention and de-escalation. We went over that in just about 2 slides. There's more on that there. And then there's a model debriefing form, and then also the complaint process is spelled out at the department's website. So those are all live links. If you want to go back and learn more, you need more information, you are always welcome to contact us at the SST, but sometimes it's quicker to just kind of go in there and look something up if you're looking for something specific, but feel free to also reach out to us. The other thing that I will share with you is we do for the PD requirements, a lot of folks are asking us. We do have a pre-K through 12 PBIS Tier 1 overview and refresher. We are doing, that is going to be an on-demand offering. We are doing an overview of that at the beginning of November to show people how to navigate that course. But that is an on-demand course that you can earn contact hours for. So if that is helpful for some of you that need to get training up and going, or you have folks that need that training, we will offer that. We're also offering at the end of this month, middle of this month, a school age PBIS Tier 2. The policy right now from the language is really more about the Tier 1. So if you need that, I would suggest looking at the on-demand course. But if you are, if you feel that your teams are doing Tier 1 with fidelity and you're ready to move on, especially with the influx of Tier 2 behavior that we're seeing, that is also going to be an option. The school age PBIS Tier 2 is in person. The overview and refresher is an on-demand, but we're going to do an overview of the course. Stacy, I don't know if you remember, it's November 5th, 3rd. One of those days.
November 5th.
Thank you. November 5th that's when we'll do the overview. And does anybody have the school age up? It's October 16th, 15th, something like that. If you click on those live links, it'll tell you the dates. I cannot keep all those numbers in my head. So I'm going to pause before I throw it to Michelle. Anything in the chat or anybody want to unmute as far as that was really a quick and dirty. But there are a lot of resources out there, you guys, if you need to go back and kind of look things up, or you can contact us and we're happy to do that for you. It looks like Stacy raised, I don't know if Stacy raised her hand.
Hi. Well, I'm going to ask you guys a silly question. And I think, Heidi, I've talked to you about this a couple times, but I'm just trying to wrap my head around some things. So as far as this training is concerned, that pretty much means that every single person in our district, our cafeteria, our bus drivers, everyone needs this PD training. So
That
I
would-
guess
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I'm just wondering how, like, when we're documenting all this training for people as far as that tier 1, and then we're documenting like our CPI training, our de-escalation, and some of these district plans, like who is getting this information? How are we getting it to the people who need it? Or how is this going to be organized for you guys to come look at it, I guess?
So that's a great question. And right now, nobody is looking at it and there's no requirement to provide that to the state. I think my response, and I'm going to throw it to my team, particularly Stacy. My response to that would be, you want to have your house in order, because if there is ever a complaint filed, or if there's ever a due process, any kind of due process or anything like that, you just want to make sure that if they say, what is your process? How do we know these people got trained? That you have record of that. Right now, there is no reporting requirements, with the exception of what your EMIS person sends in for the report card. And that is where are you at with the implementation. And the other reporting requirement would be your restraint and seclusion itself. But right now, there is no process, to my knowledge, that you have to turn in those records. So my suggestion would be that for that to be in order, so that if somebody were to ever ask, or you'd have to prove it or show it in a legal sense, that you would have it. And Stacy, I'm going to throw it to you.
Sure, I would agree with that, Heidi. And I also would, I would just add, if there's anybody on the call now that already has an idea of the process, what they're going to do within their district, feel free to share that out as well.
Yeah.
Because I know some people have already been thinking about how to document this. And I think Heidi threw that to me because it kind of makes you think about the special education side of things and how you're so careful to document everything. And so what is that process? And again, being clear and having a process at the district level, so that if the person who was in charge of that would happen to leave or step away, you would still have that process in those records. And then I too, as far as training goes, with that piece that talks about LPDC being responsible to handle that, that does have some onus on individuals, because those are individual professional development plans. And so individual people should be documenting the training that they're receiving as well.
And the department really does not give any guidance on that, Stacy. Unfortunately, they basically say this is all monitored through your LPDC. And when we ask, that's basically what they tell us. So I wish we could give more guidance on that, but that's all the guidance that we're receiving.
That's okay. I'm just kind of thinking I'm going to set it up like my preschool licensing binders, and just have all of that in there.
It's good to have, if, God forbid anything ever were to happen where they come and ask you for that. There's no, like I said, there's no requirement now to produce that, but you never know what might happen. So, yeah. All right. I think I'll give it another second, and then I'm going to throw it to Michelle to talk about what we want to talk about this year in our network.
I think Stacy has one piece of information to
Okay.
share, and then I'll
Yep.
close out the meeting, Heidi.
Thank
Sure.
you guys so much.
Yep.
All right. Well, as Heidi said, we wanted to hear from you about the rest of the year for the network and what you would like to hear about. As we've been in conversation with many of you with even some of like the wow and wonderings that you shared at the beginning of the meeting today, some of the things that we've heard, some of the themes we've been hearing are things around social emotional learning. We've had people asking us about the culturally responsive field guide and what is that and how do you use that? We've definitely heard a lot about tier 2 needs and that there's an influx of students that need those supports. And then also thinking about trauma-informed classroom practices and how do those fit within the framework. And then again, attendance. This has been another issue that has continued to arise as we've been facing so many challenges this year. And as our team was really thinking about this, what came to our mind was the whole child framework. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that on ODE's website. There's a live link there in the bottom with the whole child framework. But what they've done is they've really taken the approach that the whole child is what we're focusing on. We're really looking at children as a whole and all the different components that make up who a child is, but also all of the supports for children. And this will become no surprise to any of you, but when they stopped and really thought about where do we have the opportunity to access all these different pieces of family, community partnership, health, emotion, academics, all of those things, Well, you know that happens in your local buildings, in your local school districts. And so this framework is really taking a look at the whole child and how do you put things in place that are supporting that whole child so that they can not only be surviving, but they can be thriving and moving forward in what they need to move forward. So we were just trying to make those connections to see how do these connect together. And we all on this call think through the lens of the PBIS framework and can really see how these connect into the framework. So we added a live link. That question that says, what would you like to hear more about, is a live link to a survey that's just 2 questions. If you would just go ahead and click that and answer for us, we would love to know, are you interested in any of these topics as we move forward? And if not these topics, what other topics would you be interested in? Because as we said, we'd really like to have your feedback as we move forward for the rest of the year and really help support you to support the children that are in your buildings. So feel free to go ahead and click that link and just answer that. Like I said, it's 2 questions just to give us some feedback as we move forward and think about topics for the rest of the year. We'll give you just about a minute to do that, and then we'll move on to our next area. Michelle dropped the link to the survey in the chat, so if anybody needs to access it, it's in the chat as well.
And the responses are coming through. I can see it on my end. When at the end, I'll show, we can show it to show everyone what people are thinking. So please go ahead and do that.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Michelle.
Thanks, Stacy. And thank you to all of you for your questions and ideas that you've put in the idea board. I've kind of been keeping an eye on that. As we end out our meeting, we've got a couple of minutes left. We just wanted to remind you of a resource that you all should have access to through SST8. We have an SST8 regional warehouse, and this warehouse came about a couple of years back when we had a lot of requests from districts asking for examples of what other buildings might be doing to support the framework. So if you have access to this slide, there is a link that will take you right into that SST8 regional warehouse. Once you're in there, you'll find folders that have examples across the tiers, tier 1, tier 2. We're working on examples for tier 3. You'll also see folders in there to support remote learning. Hopefully we won't have to worry about that as much moving forward, but there are some really great examples in there. We've had a couple of questions about access to the recording for today, as well as slides. There is a folder within that warehouse where we will upload the recording from each of our leaders' chats this year, as well as the PowerPoint slides. So you'll have access to that for whatever you may need it for. So that's there also. And with 3 minutes left, if anyone has any questions they want to ask the group, I know our PBIS team is happy to stay on a few minutes past 10 to address any individual questions that you may have. I'll just pause for a minute to see if there's anything pressing that anyone wants to ask the group.
Are you guys seeing the responses or just still the PowerPoint? Okay.
Yes.
So if anybody else wants to get in there, that's kind of what it looks like. SCL and tier 2 seem to be the top, but please, if you haven't gone in there yet, go ahead and put in what you think you might want to talk about.
Heidi, one of the questions on the idea board was asking, is there a checklist anywhere so that people can ensure they're meeting the requirements of this very complex rule? And so that's something I just wanted to put out there.
Checklist for the PD or for the restraint and seclusion?
The question just asks, it would be nice to have a checklist so we can ensure that we meet every requirement of this.
Yeah, for the PD, there is a document that is guidance on professional development. It's not a checklist, but it's kind of like it's just kind of like a graphic that kind of shows you, like a T-chart that shows you what should be happening with professional development. As far as restraint and seclusion, other than the model policy that is on ODE's website, I am not aware, and I will throw that to the group if there's somebody that has a checklist that they've developed, but not to my knowledge. I don't know of anything. There's nothing from the state that I believe that they have, but I'll throw that out to everybody. If anybody.
It doesn't sound like there's anybody that really has that checklist developed yet, but
Mm.
if they do and want to share it out with people, that would be fantastic and helpful to the rest of your colleagues. And I know we're going to continue working through what we can do to help support districts as well, because this is a lot of new information and it's a lot to consider at this time when there's so much else going on right now in your buildings from day to day.
Yeah. Oh, let me.
Thank you for bringing that up, Rachel.
Yeah. I'm just going to go to the
Yep.
last slide.
Thank you, Heidi.
Mhm.
So you'll see on your screen, the meetings, we have 5 meetings left this year. There's a direct link to register for December's meeting right there on the slide, or you can always go to our website to register for that. And as things come up between now and December, please feel free to reach out to any of us on the team individually. Because if you're wondering about it, there's a good chance that there's others that also have those same questions. And it would be great to use these meetings to be able to talk through some of those questions or resources like the checklist that would make what you're doing in district easier.
Mhm. Agreed.
Yep.
So we are at 10 o'clock and we will stay on for anybody that would want to stay after if you have any particular questions or if there's any other networking that needs to be done. But knowing what you guys are going through in the district, I don't want to hold anybody longer than we have to. So I would just like to thank you for coming to our first network meeting. I so apologize for the technological interruption. I'm glad we were able to get back on and get through. And if you want anybody who wants to stay on again, please feel free. That meeting in April is going to be an in-person meeting. And I think we are going to be doing, if folks, we're going to be providing some technical assistance if folks are looking to apply for recognition. So I think that's mainly what that meeting is going to be. So we'll take a look at your topics that you guys have voted on. And if you haven't, please do so. And we will plan our network meetings around those accordingly. So thank you. And you guys have a great rest of your week.